Welcome to the Bulletproof Screenplay Podcast, episode number 7. The work never matches the dream of perfection the artist has to start with. William Faulkner.
Broadcasting from a dark, windowless room in Hollywood, when we really should be working on that next draft. It's the Bulletproof Screenplay Podcast, showing you the craft and business of screenwriting while teaching you how to make your screenplay bulletproof. And here's your host, Alex Ferrari.
Welcome to another episode of the Bulletproof Screenplay Podcast. I am your humble host, Alex Ferrari. Now, today's show is sponsored by Bulletproof Script Coverage. Now, unlike other script coverage services, Bulletproof Script Coverage actually focuses on the kind of project you are and the goals of the project you are. So we actually break it down by 3 categories: micro budget, indie film market, and studio film. There's no reason to get coverage from a reader that's used to reading tentpole movies when your movie's going to be done for $100,000. And we wanted to focus on that at Bulletproof Script Coverage. Our readers have worked with Marvel Studios, CAA, WME, NBC, HBO, Disney, Scott Free, Warner Brothers, The Blacklist, and many, many more. So if you need your screenplay or TV script covered by professional readers, head on over to covermyscreenplay.com. Now, after speaking to so many screenwriters out there, I know and I've heard so many times that they want to learn how to produce their own screenplays. They want to produce their own work and have no idea how to do it. Well, I wanted to let you guys know that I just launched a brand new game-changing producing course called the Indie Film Producing Masterclass with award-winning indie film producer Suzanne Lyons. Now, the masterclass focuses on $1 million and below budgets, but all the things you learn there can easily be translated to $100 million if need be. So if you want to learn how to produce your own material, just head over to producingmasterclass.com. Now, today on the show, we have an emotions expert. His name is Karl Iglesias. He's a best-selling author and a master lecturer around the world. And he really focuses on the emotional impact of writing and getting the most emotion out of the words that are being put on the page. I've read all his books and taken a few of his courses, and he's wonderful and really made me start thinking differently about how I write, what kind of words you use to just pull out that emotion to really get the reader really excited about what they're reading. So I wanted to bring him on the show. And this episode, I beat him up something fierce. It's literally kind of like a free masterclass on screenwriting and emotional impact of your characters and story. And he even told me afterwards, he's like, my God, you really beat me up in this episode. I'm like, yeah, I wanted to get as much stuff out for screenwriters as humanly possible. So please get ready to take some detailed notes as we drop some major knowledge bombs in this episode. So without any further ado, enjoy my conversation with Karl Iglesias. Welcome, Karl. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you. My pleasure.
So we'll jump right into it. So what is your teachings are focused on the emotional impacts of stories and screenplays. Can you explain this a little bit to the audience?
Sure. So I was a writer. I'm still a writer. And I tend to be kind of very left brain. My wife likes to say that I have 2 left brains. Very, very mostly logical, and the thing that drives me more is the try to understand how things work. So I've always wanted to tell stories. I always wanted to be in filmmaking, and I wanted to know why. You read all the books and it tells you, okay, you need to do this, you need to do that, 3-act structure, character development, character arcs, and everything that was being taught. I was wanting to know why, and so I started to get more into the effect of storytelling more than the rules. And it really didn't take long to understand why I was loving certain films more than others. And it was basically about the emotional response that I was getting from these films. I tend to like, comedies or thrillers. And I realized, well, a comedy that doesn't make you laugh is not never going to be your favorite movie. Or a horror film that doesn't scare you is not going to be your favorite horror film. So it's really all about the emotions and response of the movies. And so I kind of went, with reverse engineering, figure out, okay, the end effect is the emotional response of the audience. And so how do you get there? How do you do that? And that's what I tend to focus in my studies and in my teaching. It's the kind of, as people say, it's the kind of book that you always wanted to read, but couldn't find out there, so you wrote it.
Right.
That's what it is. So I wrote that, and as far as I know, I'm the only one who speaks about this, and I think it's the most important thing. If when people read your script, if they're not engaged by your script, then you lost. That's it. It doesn't even go past the reader to the executives, let alone to actors and directors and the studio betting $100 million to make your film if it doesn't engage them. So the rule number one, and the only rule in storytelling, is to engage the audience and not be boring. And that's really, I like to say in my classes that there's only there's thousands and thousands of rules and principles from all the books, and you can break all of them. Except one. You cannot break this one rule, which is be interesting. And as long as you're interesting, you can break any rule you want, and I think you'll still be a good storyteller. But that's the key. You got to engage your audience, and so I focus more on the actual specific techniques that generate those emotional responses.
So, with that said, I'm gonna put you on the spot a little bit. And one of my favorite films of all time, and arguably now, according to IMDb, the number one film of all time, The Shawshank Redemption.
Okay, yeah, great film.
It is. It's absolutely amazing, and I've analyzed that movie so much because I've wondered what is in that story and in the way that Frank Darabont wrote that story and also directed, and the characters and the actors and the whole package. But what's in that movie that touches so many people? I mean, like in a way that there's never been another movie that I know that when it came out, it wasn't like this blowout success. Obviously, it was not. It did get nominated for a Best Picture, but it didn't win. But it's one of those movies that kind of grew later, and till now, all of a sudden, it kind of just came up and took over The Godfather.
Absolutely.
When The Godfather came out, it blew everything out the water. Everybody knew it was the greatest thing ever made at that time. But Shawshank didn't. And I'm curious on your take of why that story hits so beautifully with everybody.
Well, I think there's two combinations. First of all, and you're right, when the movie first came out, it wasn't a success at all. And the thing that makes a movie a success usually from the start, which is the beginning, is usually the concept. So the concept is like the book cover, right? There's something about the concept that's unique, that drives people to the theaters.
Not a great concept.
Not a great concept at all, right? It actually kept people away. It's like, okay, a movie about people in prison. Who cares? Who cares? I'll admit, I was one of them. It's like that movie does not interest me,
right?
And it was only through word of mouth and reviews, and then you finally go, okay, I'll go see it, and then you're wowed by it. So when you're in the theater. So, when you're trying to write a story, I always recommend, since you're not, I would say you're a nobody and you want to interest people, you got to do it with a concept first. So at least people open your script and read it. But in this case, you had, it was simply word of mouth. So what is it about once you're inside the theater, once you're committed to watching this film, what is it that wows you? So the very first thing is always characters. That the first thing is a character that you connect with, and the very first thing that they connect you with is Andy, and a character who is unjustly accused of something that he didn't do, and that automatically connects you. So if you're familiar with the my techniques for connecting emotionally with a character, one of the most powerful one is pity. So feeling sorry for someone, and you automatically feel sorry for him because he didn't do, he's accused of something, and he's accused for, I guess, his life, right? For something that he didn't do. So this undeserved misfortune is one of the biggest techniques you can use to connect with a character. And so you're automatically connected. So you're already on board. And then you realize, okay, well, what do you do when you're inside a prison? I mean, the only thing you can do to survive is hope. And hope is probably one of the most powerful themes and messages in stories.
It's true.
Because all of us in our lives are struggle. And
especially in the movie business.
Yeah, exactly. But if you look at great stories, and certainly the foundation of most religions is hope. it's one of the most powerful things. So you got a character we care about, combined with this message of hope. Get busy living, or get busy dying, which is such a powerful line, right?
Oh, amazing.
And there you go. And then, of course, you got to tell a good story. So there's elements of suspense, there's tension, anticipation, surprise, humor, other characters you care about.
Red.
Certainly fear. Once you're connected with a character, what you do as a storyteller is you're trying to make us worry about that character. You hope that they will be happy, and you hope that they'll survive, or they do whatever they want. The interesting about this movie, though, is that we didn't know what Andy, his goal was secret for 19 years, and so we didn't really know what his main goal was other than surviving. But if you create jeopardy for that character throughout, and they certainly do in this film, you're worried all the time, and so you're constantly engaged in this film. So you have the character you care about, you have the struggle, and then of course the big epiphany and the way everything is resolved, which is very clever, surprising. Poetic justice at the end. I mean, it's just, and friendship. I mean, it's got everything is there. You got all the great ingredients, and then of course you got to give kudos to Stephen King for the story and for Darabont for the adaptation. But it's just one of those things where everything, all the stars are aligned, and with great characters and good performances and a great script. I mean, it's definitely one of the greatest movies out there.
And then Darabont, I heard he literally gave the script away to get the opportunity to direct it. Because he was offered a few million, because people who read it in the business understood this was like, oh, this is serious, this is a good script. But they offered him like 7 figures, like mid to high 7 figures for it, and he's like, nope. He finally
wanted to direct it. Huh?
He wanted to direct it, and it started his career. And I think it was a good idea for him.
Absolutely, yeah. It's kind of like Sylvester Stallone and Rocky too. Yeah.
Now, do you actually believe that Rocky was written in 3 days? He says he wrote it in 3 days.
It's possible that he wrote it in 3 days, but he probably developed it over a longer period of time.
Right, and that's another great. I mean, geez,
absolutely.
That script is the ultimate underdog story.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a question. Why is Hollywood lacking such true emotion in its films today? And why do they why do you think? Because in the 70s and the 80s, even, there was more emotion and character in their movies than today. Today, it just seems to me so flat and so heavy, reliant on visual effects and concepts and things that we've seen back from the 70s and 80s that they're rehashing today. Why do you what do you think of the business today in general?
It's the business is always a sign of the times. It's always a reflection of the culture, and our culture in the 60s and 70s was a lot different than it is today. And you got to understand that the film studios are a business. They're corporations. They're in the business of making money. So they're not in the business of making art. It's one of those really interesting paradoxes where I think in Europe they're more interested in making art because their films are subsidized by the government. But in the United States, it's all it's capitalism. So you basically go, okay, well, who buys our films? Who are our films for? Who is our audience? What do they want? And when you have a huge population of the 14, 15-year-old boys who go see the movies, that's why you have so many superhero movies and kind of like video game type movies and horror films and comedies and but that's the sign of the times, and once in a while you get a great movie that goes across all demographics, the 4Q movies, and then then try to make the same kind of movie, and then people get bored. It's one of those things. I mean, we're one of the strongest emotions we have as an audience is this sense of we always want something new. And when we get the same thing over and over and over, we eventually get tired of it, and then we gravitate and we gravitate to this new thing. So you always get those in movies. You always get that one film that just the sleeper hit, basically,
right?
And then everybody wants to make it,
and then they beat it to death,
and then you try something new. The thing that really really surprises me still is this. Is the superhero movies that keep going on and that have been, slated for release until, 2020, which is unbelievable. They have such a high confidence in movies. And I'm kind of surprised that there's so much saturation. I'm surprised that the audience hasn't tired of it,
now Warner Brothers is getting into it, and now they're going to bring all their slates out. So I'm wondering about how much longer. I'm a comic book geek, so I'm happy about it. But at a certain point, now they're going to be doing Star Wars every year.
Right.
Until a foreseeable future, it's
well. The thing is, as long as you tell a good story, that's what counts. That's what counts. So as long as you can maintain great storytelling within that concept and that genre, then I think you're okay. I think so far they're doing okay. Comic books have been, I've been in business for over 80 years, I think, and it's like and they're still in business. So, as long as you maintain good storytelling and characters. Yeah, absolutely.
So, what are the biggest mistakes you see in first-time screenwriters?
Ooh.
I know it's a short show, but just try to condense it a little bit.
I was gonna say, how long do you have? Probably the biggest mistake.
Top 5,
the biggest mistake. The biggest mistake is I think over relying on plot over character. That's one. And so you tend to have flat characters. And another big mistake I see, dialogue usually is pretty crappy. And that's usually the one thing that we kind of read most of in a script. We're trying to get the story from the characters, and good dialogue usually reflects the character's personality. So, and the fact that the scripts don't really amount to anything. They don't really
go anywhere,
or they don't say anything. They don't have any meaning. We don't know what the author wanted to really say, which is usually reflected in the character arcs. There's always a reason for everything. When they say like structure is another thing too. Everybody talks about structure, but I don't think anybody understands what that means. They think, well, 3-act structure, beginning, middle, and end, but they don't understand that the turning points that create that structure are more about character than actually plot points. Sid Field used to call them plot points, but so people think, well, it's got to be something big and that changes the story. It's not really that. It's more about the character and the character decisions and the character changes, and the epiphany of the character and what that means to the overall story. That's what we're looking at. So we're talking about, I think, mostly kind of like there's a lot of education out there for scripts, but I don't think it goes deep enough. Or I think most people don't really understand kind of like the deep principles of story and how it relates to us as human beings. Which I think once you really understand that's kind of like it's mostly what my focus is at this stage of my career, is really kind of going deeper into story and understanding what it means and why we like stories, or why story has such an effect on us emotionally. It's good to say, well, we enjoy stories and we like to feel suspense, but why is that? And I think once you understand that, it kind of teaches you that how to do it, teaches you why you should do it, and to, kind of makes you see when you don't have it in a script to kind of really focus on it,
Now, did you happen to see Straight Outta Compton yet?
I haven't seen it yet, no.
And I saw it this last weekend, and it's.
I heard it was good.
It's so far this year is probably the best film I've seen, which says a lot about the industry today. Like a film about a good storyteller, a good story about gangster rap is like the best story out there right now, which which fascinates me. But it was good. Even my wife, who had no idea about gangster rap, she sat there and she's like, that was a really good movie because of the character and the story. Which leads me to my next question. There has been great debate about this question for many years, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about it.
Sure.
What, in your opinion, is more important, plot or character?
Well, that is a very good question. Well, you probably heard, you heard this before, right. You get both ends, right? But most people tend to lean toward character. And the reason for that is because you will hear that character creates plot. The more, since we need to connect with character, and since we tend to appreciate more three-dimensional characters, you can't really kind of have just a plot that's already ready-made and trying to fit characters in it, because the end result will be flat characters. So characters tend to have the edge. But here's my point on it. Here's my view on it. Stories are neither plot-driven nor character-driven. Okay. So that's going to be probably kind of the controversial thing to say. You think it's one or the other, but it's neither. What I like to say is that stories are tension-driven. Okay, so it's not plot or character; it's tension that grabs an audience, that makes you appreciate a story. And tension is really, a problem that needs to be solved, or a character that needs to change.
Okay.
So, you need tension at the story level to keep us. It's the only thing that keeps us engaged, basically.
Mm-hmm.
When I talk about all the emotions of story, and I talk about the audience emotions, not the character emotions. So you have, for example, character emotions like, sadness and joy and fear.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm talking about the audience emotions, the emotions you pay money to go see in the theaters, we're talking about curiosity, anticipation, tension, hope, worry, surprise, laughter, right? Those are the emotions you like to feel as an audience.
Mm-hmm.
And all of these could be encompassed into that one umbrella of tension. In other words, when you're feeling tension in a story, there's no way you're bored. You're completely engaged when you're feeling tension. So that's really the key emotions you want to feel.
Now, tension in what sense? Like tension, any kind of tension, or comedic tension, or romantic?
Well, it's all tension. It's all tension, and tension basically to me, it's the opposite of boredom. Basically,
okay.
You like, if you're
Engaged.
bored, passively sitting back in your seat and you're going, you think about something else. When you're feeling, for example, if somebody creates a question on the, you see a character enter a room, the very first thing that goes in your mind is, who is this character? Right? So why are they in the room? What are they doing? Where are we? So all these questions, when you first start a movie, that creates curiosity, right? So curiosity, that sense of curiosity in your brain, is tension, right? Because you have this question. When that question gets answered, you have tension relief. Okay? And everything that's enjoyable about life is tension relief, basically. Right? I mean, when you're having, you want to have sex with someone, you have this, you have tension, and it gets released at the end. When you have, when you're hungry, that's tension. You eat, you feel satisfied, right? You're tired, that's tension. You go to sleep, you feel relief. So it's all about tension relief. Excuse me for a second. And so it's all about tension. So all these, when you feel anticipation, like the character says, okay, I'm going to go and, I need to go to Europe to catch a killer, right? So when you say I'm going to Europe, so you anticipate the arrival to, or, meet me in the parking lot, so I'm going to beat you up later after school. Oh, yeah. That's anticipation. So that's tension. Anticipation is tension. Curiosity is tension. And
is she going to kiss me or not? Or
exactly. Yeah. In a scene. So so when you go deeper, right, you'll know that, storytelling or filmmaking is all scenes, right? So at the scene level, that's another thing too, that when you're talking about what's really doesn't work in scripts, it's mostly scenes. So I tend to teach a lot of classes on scene writing, because I think it's at the scene level, that counts. And scenes are really mini stories. So you have a character who wants something in the scene and is having difficulty getting it. And that's what creates tension in the scene, because you want, well, will they get it? And that's what drives the scene. That's what drives the whole story, if you have a main tension in the story. And really, when you think about it, all stories are just tension until they are relief, until you have a resolution, right? You have the 3-act structure. people like to say that it's, beginning, middle, and end, but I like to say it's mostly, setup, struggle, and resolution, right? And the struggle is that middle act two, which is the struggle to get what they want. And in a lot of scripts, you see characters, first of all, that you don't know what they want, that hasn't been thought of, so that's already broken right there. And if we know what they want, usually it's not that difficult. So it's not that interesting. So there's no struggle. And so there you go. That's my answer. So it's all about tension.
Okay, there it is then.
Yeah.
We've put the end to the debate right now.
Yes. Well, this is just according to me all.
Of course.
Yeah.
So in your opinion, what is the functions of dialogue?
The functions of dialogue. Boy, you have like really big questions here.
I'm trying.
Class to answer those.
I'm sorry. I'll start throwing some more softer questions.
Well, the functions of dialogue. I mean, there's only two ways you can tell a story. Really, you can describe something, right? So, and then you can have characters talking about it, right? So the difference between the two is that traditionally the narrative part of it is more passive and the dialogue is more active, meaning that when characters speak in dialogue, you are immersed in the experience. You're there with them. You're like a fly on the wall, like really kind of being part of the conversation. And that's usually in your brain, that's usually more interesting than just reading. If I told you, Bob entered the room and said to Susie that he loved her and that he couldn't live without her. So I'm just kind of describing something, right? So I'm just telling you a little story. But if I say, Bob came into the room and he goes, Susie, I love you. I can't live without you. And Susie says, well, sorry, I don't love you back. I'm seeing your best friend or whatever, right?
Right.
So, by actually having the characters speak, you're a lot more immersed. It's more of an active experience than just description. And usually readers, when they read scripts and they read tons of scripts, they usually tend to just read dialogue only. They're trying to grasp the story because they have to read a script so fast. So I like to say that they read vertically. Most readers, at least, the ones that I know of from experience. Because they have to read scripts very fast. And so they usually get the story from the dialogue. So, when you see scripts with a lot of description, they usually don't tend to like that. It takes them longer to read it, takes them longer to understand the story. And also the great thing about dialogue is that not only you can communicate the story, you can also communicate the characters' personalities and attitudes. So you get to really get to learn the characters. And also dialogue tends to be the joy of the, the wit and cleverness and sarcasm and of a story, of characters.
Now, with dialogue, I would argue to say one of the greatest dialogue writers alive today is Quentin Tarantino.
Sure.
What is your take on his style, which is so unique that I mean, I tell people all the time, like, there's certain directors, certain writers that might have not made it in this market, this time or that time. But honestly, I think if Tarantino shows up today with Reservoir Dogs, it would create a revolution just because of who he is and his talent.
Absolutely.
What is your take on his technique and how he does his things? Because it's such a unique person. And I always tell filmmakers, if you want to learn how to write dialogue, listen to his dialogue. Don't try to write his dialogue because you'll never be able to.
Right. But the thing about Tarantino, I mean, first of all, he is extremely knowledgeable about film. He used to work in a video store and he used to like pretty much immerse himself in movies and even really obscure movies, and foreign films and Hong Kong films and crime films. So he's very knowledgeable. So he's able to ask. Actually, my belief of art or creativity is really a way of combining old things into something new. And this is what he does. So the more old things the more the more resources you have, which is this knowledge of film, the more you can combine them into something unique. And that's what he does very well. So that's that. Two is that he's not afraid to break the rules.
Oh yeah.
And like I said, like I use Tarantino all the time in examples of when I say that you can break every rule except one and be interesting, and that's the one. That's what he does. I mean, he breaks every single rule except one. He's always interesting, and that's why he's successful, because people gravitate to his films because they know they're not going to be bored.
Right. And so if you watch Pulp Fiction, which the structure of that film is obviously not standard.
Right.
But if you look at the plot points, they actually hit.
Yeah. Well,
which is kind of weird.
Absolutely. Well, yeah. Well, it's like the French filmmaker Jean-Luc Godard is known to have said, every film has a beginning, middle, and end, not necessarily in that order, right? So if you can put Pulp Fiction in the order of the story, it's just he decided to tell it in a just non-linear way. He just played with time a little bit.
And it just, obviously.
Yeah, it was very unique, absolutely. And entertaining, which is the most important thing. I mean, I've seen films where people tried experimenting with things, but they were just boring as hell,
Right.
In this case, he experimented and it turned out okay because it was interesting. He still told a story with interesting characters and surprises.
So you wrote a book called 101 Habits of Highly Successful Screenwriters. Can you share a few of those habits with the audience? Some of the top ones that you think that are really important.
Well, the very, very top one is the one that that led to the Writing for Emotional Impact, which was habit number 69, which was evoking emotion on the page. And so one of those habits was, successful writers are successful because they're able to evoke an emotion on the page consistently, right? So they're able to create that emotional response in the reader. They're always entertaining. So they're masters of their craft. And when I started teaching, because of that book, at the time I was just a writer, and I had no interest in teaching. I was just a writer. I just wanted to be alone in my room, right? So I was completely terrified. But I was invited to the very first Screenwriting Expo, and because of those habits, the book, and the thing that most people wanted to know was of course this particular habit, which is the craft. They all wanted to know about the craft. So I started teaching about that part of it. And then people eventually wanted to have a book, and that's the reason why the second book was written, because people just kept asking, from after my presentation, so is there a book with all that information that I was giving? But in terms of habits, that's the number one by far. I mean, you could, like I said, you could ignore any other habit if you consistently are able to create an emotional response in the reader from your words. You're guaranteed success. Because, you can just, you can drop your script in the middle of a Beverly Hills park and, an agent will pick that up and read it. And if they're totally wowed by that script, there's no way he's not going to pick up the phone and call you. But that's the key. They have to be wowed by the script. And 99% of the scripts out there are not that, that great, unfortunately. So that's why there's so much problems. But the other thing too, and this is more about the business aspect of it, is that one of the habits is that you have to develop a really thick skin in Hollywood, because most of the business is rejections. You have to be able to take rejection and be able to live with it and be able to persevere and keep writing and keep getting better and keep having hope. Oh,
Tarantino took forever for him to even
and a lot of
noticed.
people do. One of the surprising things when I was interviewing all those writers was that their very first script that they sold was usually their 10th or more. That they kept writing even though they kept being rejected and not selling anything and having to work crappy jobs or even not having any money in the bank and struggling, but they just kept at it. And I think a lot of writers, even very talented writers who could be great writers, usually because of life and family and usually give up because of the realities of life and don't have that persistence and that passion to keep writing.
I think writers are one of the most undervalued parts of the filmmaking process.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
It is all part. I mean, it starts on the page.
Yeah.
Yeah, it starts.
They're really the most important element. I mean, when you think about it, without the writer, if there's no script, nobody in this town has a job.
Right.
Right. I mean, think about all the jobs in this industry, right? There's over 200, 300 jobs that are related to making a film.
If not more, right?
If not more. And we're not talking about just the film. We're talking about, the business agents and producers and accountants and lawyers. I mean, if without a script, nobody has a job.
As Hollywood realizes every time there's a writer's guild strike.
Exactly.
All of a sudden, everyone goes, "Oh, wait a minute, we need these guys."
Right, exactly.
Maybe we should pay them a little bit more.
But that is the paradox that they know secretly that they're the most important, but they think that they could do it. They think that it's not that hard, that anybody can do it.
Oh,
that's the problem.
Well, that's the thing. If I've seen a movie, so I could write one. It's kind of like, and everyone says that, and then I'm like, well, you could also listen to a symphony. Doesn't mean you can write one. And
right.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a lot more than just that.
This is old joke that I like to say about this guy who goes to a piano store and he goes inside the piano store as this old man. He sits down and starts playing the piano, and he's awful. and the salesman goes, "What's going on? What are you thinking?" He says, "Well, I can't understand this. I've been listening to music my whole life."
Why doesn't it work? I don't know.
Right, exactly. Right. So that's the thing. People think that because we immersed in films, because we see movies all the time, we know how they work and everything. Mm-hmm. It's like telling a joke too. Some people, everybody understands jokes and appreciates jokes, but nobody can be a comedian.
Ooh, it's rough to be up on that stage. No question about it.
Yeah.
So, what are some of the mistakes you see in indie film stories and in their screenplays in general? Because I know they're very kind of different than your mainstream movies. So,
yes,
indie films, I find a lot of times when they hit, they're wonderful, but the majority of them are, a little rough sometimes.
Yeah.
What's your experience with that?
Well, my experience with them is that, as it's not going to be surprising for me to say, it's again the emotional response. So, when you say an indie film doesn't hit, that's basically what it means. It means it just didn't grab the audience. The audience was mostly bored by it. So, there's always good elements in an indie film that makes the people on board to commit to it and make it. And usually it's about characters. The thing about indie hits is that most of them, as far from my experience, don't really have a concept. It's mostly a very soft concept, and it's really kind of relies on character and the drama of characters. And so, great, the characters are great, but ultimately, if the audience is bored throughout, in other words, if the other elements, the other emotions are ignored, like tension or surprise or twists or, something unique about it, they just don't grab the audience, or maybe it's the statement that the filmmaker wants to make. Maybe it's a statement that we just don't care about.
Right. That happens.
There's a lot of things,
So can you give an example of a few indie films that blew you away and why they blew you away?
Oh, it's been...
and it's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a while. Yeah.
You can go back. You go back to the early 90s. You can go back to the early 90s if you have to.
For me, the type of movies that I tend to like are more... I like... more thought-provoking films. So I tend to gravitate towards the, sci-fi and futuristic, not necessarily fantasy, but so the movies like Stranger Than Fiction, for example.
Yeah.
So anything that has a really kind of like a really very unique concept to it, but it's definitely an indie film.
Right.
I usually tend to like it because I'm more intellectually challenged, or like my mind is constantly working and thinking, and I tend to have more of a philosophical kind of mind thing. So anything that has a really kind of high concept within the indie film, I tend to like. I'm trying to think of the last one.
Memento was a pretty...
Oh, Memento, absolutely. Yeah.
That was one of those ones. Obviously, Reservoir Dogs and...
Right. And Pulp Fiction.
Pulp Fiction, which was kind of an indie, but yeah.
Yeah. Very, very old film, but a Mariachi with Robert Rodriguez, that he made very indie, right? Made it only $7,000, but there was something really unique about it, and it was entertaining. Um, so high concept, good characters, but also great, a good story there that really keeps you engaged from start to finish.
One film I think that I don't know if you liked it, and I think you might have, Adaptation.
Yeah.
That was a very interesting.
I liked
take.
it. Yeah, it was an interesting thing, and of course, we all enjoyed it because we're writers, and we could identify.
Oh, bad could we?
Yeah, but you know what? I didn't like it as much as I enjoyed Eternal Sunshine because.
Oh yeah.
Eternal Sunshine had this really high concept. Mm-hmm. So there's a good example from the very, very same filmmaker.
A very unique filmmaker.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh God, I forgot his name.
Charlie Kaufman.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if you're talking about Spike Jonze as the director, yeah. And speaking of Spike Jonze, Her too was a good indie film.
Yeah, that was a really good film.
Yeah,
very, very nice film. I like that one a lot as well.
Right.
Is there any advice you can give indie filmmakers on writing their first script, other than what we've already kind of discussed? Any specific techniques or tools that could help them to kind of get off the ground?
Just learn more about story. Mm-hmm. And we're not talking about just the usual suspects of two books and McKee and Sitfield. We're talking about just go deeper into story and how to tell a really good one. I think there's still a lot of people that don't know how to tell a good story. And of course it starts with the emotion. So obviously I would tell people, go read my book or,
Of course.
And learn that it's really about the emotions and that you could break every single rule as long as people feel those emotions. So learning how to write scenes, that would be another aspect of it. Learn how to write a good scene. I always tell writers to take acting classes because even if they're not interested in being an actor, because you get to learn how to write good scenes from actors, mm-hmm. because that's their main thing is what do I want in the scene and the different beats in the scene, and that's really how you write a good scene.
That's interesting. That's a really good. Yeah. That's a really good tip.
Yeah, and then learn how to create that feeling, really knowing what an audience wants out of a story. So we definitely want something new. So we want something, so probably a thought-provoking concept. We want characters we can connect with emotionally. So there's actually techniques for that, mm-hmm. Which I talk in the book. And then once we connect with a character, give us a goal that is worthy. A lot of the times, a character goes after something that it tends to be more of a selfish goal, and we don't really connect with that. This is something that I also speak about the paradox of the goals we have in life, which is to be rich, right?
Sure.
We go try to make money and survive. Mm-hmm. But you never see that in films. You never see that as a goal in film.
So say that again. This is interesting.
So there's this paradox of, if you ask people in real life what do they aspire to, right? They usually aspire to have a good job, to be rich, to be happy, to have things, to have material things, a big house, a good car.
Scarface.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. Exactly. Or to have power. Right.
Right.
Well, power, you see that in films, but usually it's in the cautionary tales, right? The anti-hero tragedies.
Sure.
But in films, when you think about what is it that people aspire to in films, like what their goals are, it's usually about love, mm-hmm. about family, about saving the village, about doing something for another, about finding their child. It's more about what's really important in life that people kind of still are trying to learn on their own. So there's the connection between stories and the meaning of stories and why we like stories and what is the power of stories in our life.
But do you think that a story that had the goal of being just rich or successful or comfortable and having a good family, and which are most of the goals of real life people.
Right. Yeah.
Do you think a story like that, or do you have an example of a story?
Well, no, we don't. Somebody brings the example of How to Succeed in Business and Never Trying, which is a famous play. Uh-huh. But you never see that, or you see that in a character that originally goes after that goal, but then learns that's not the usually midpoint that mm-hmm. That's not the solution. And there's a reason for that. Is because it doesn't work. It doesn't. And to go back to your question about the common errors I see in film is that usually the goals that characters have in a story are usually not what I call worthy goals, right? So there's worthy goals and, flat goals or whatever, unworthy goals. They're mostly unworthy. Like I just don't care, or I can't really connect with that character who goes after that. I just don't care. And so that's important. One of the things that I teach about connecting with characters, that not only you have to use these techniques to make us, feel sorry for him, show their humanity, and show their admirable traits, to just so you care about them, right? But the second part of that equation is, what do they go after and why? And so in the movie, what do they go after is very important, because if we don't care what they go after, we're just not going to care. Right. We're going to just see them go through the motions and struggle, but we're not going to care. And that's why one of the things that I teach a lot about is Pixar, because Pixar knows how to tell great stories. Oof. And so I go through this whole list of the entire movies, and I go and show them what the characters are after. And if you see what they're after, it's always about, saving a friend, saving a child, falling in love, saving the village. It's all these things that are considered, that goes deeper into our humanity and our sense of being social with, being part of this group, as opposed to being a selfish, singular person that goes after what they want just to be happy. And you never see that. If talk about Shawshank Redemption, his goal was not to die, right? But not to be stuck in this prison, right? So he was, for 19 years, he planned to escape, and he finally escaped. But if you look at what is the thing that really makes us completely fall in love with that movie is the last, twist. 30 seconds. No, not the twist of him escaping. Oh, because think about it, right? Yeah. Think about it. Remember, it's not Andy's story; it's Red's story. That's another thing.
It's very true. It is.
So if you think about the way the movie ends, the movie doesn't end with Andy escaping. It ends with Red connecting as a friend with Andy on that beach.
And right. And did you know?
And that is the moment that makes us go, oh, right?
It's done.
It's done. Exactly. There's actually a very, you know who Lindsey Doran is, the producer?
Yes.
So she's known for talking about story too. I think there's a couple of videos online, some TED Talks that she did about the ending of films, and how the thing that people really, really care about a film is not the achievement of the character's goal. It's what happens afterwards, which is the ability to share that feeling with people they love. Right. So she mentions Rocky, for example. People think that Rocky, a lot of people think he won the fight, which he doesn't. No. But they remember that thing when he goes like, Adrian, but that, they think it ends on the fight, but it doesn't end on the fight. It ends with him and her at the end, and saying, I love you. Right. And she mentions Dirty Dancing too, about the fact that it doesn't end with the girl leaping in the arms of Patrick Swayze. It ends with her reconciling with her father. So there's all these, what's really important. I think film and stories talk about what's really important in life. They kind of like they're teaching us how to live. I like to say that stories are kind of like the how-to manual for life. And they're kind of like they're coded in this entertainment form, because people.
That's what stories are.
Yeah, exactly. People can actually tell you how to live, but that's usually what like documentaries or nonfiction or documentaries. But stories are a lot more powerful, because they're entertaining, but the message is in there. The message, they're kind of like subtly telling you how to live by entertaining you. It's like a sugar-coated pill.
Like myths and legends, essentially. That's how
exactly
the meat and potatoes of our society is passed along.
Right, exactly.
So, an interesting note, though, on that Shawshank Redemption, that last scene, from what I understand, was added by the studio.
The scene about the
with Red,
in Mexico?
Yeah, from what
really?
I've studied the movie a lot,
right?
And I've watched every documentary ever made. And originally, the original script did not have that scene. And
how does the original script end? Do you remember?
It ends with him driving in the bus going towards Andy.
Oh, okay. But it's still, that's fine. That's fine. It's still as powerful, I think. I mean,
but the beach was like, we needed to see it.
Yeah.
And it was,
as long as it's not, that it doesn't focus on Andy, because it wasn't Andy's story.
No, it was Red on the bus, and he just drove off. And then if you notice that the helicopter, I think there was a helicopter shot that kind of goes off into the ocean.
Right.
And then it dissolves into that, because that was the end, that was the last shot. And then they put in the dissolve on Andy on the beach afterwards, which I think as studios notes go, I think that's probably one of the best ones I've ever heard.
That is true. That's true. I think that was very powerful.
So I have a couple more questions for you if you have some time. One, can you explain, and I know this might be a big question, so if you don't have enough time,
as usual.
Sorry. Can you explain to the audience what is subtext and why is it so important?
Ooh, okay.
I'm sorry, Karl, if I'm asking
it's okay.
deep
it's funny
questions.
because you're hitting on the questions that I have a whole course about. You know what I mean? Like I teach a whole course on just subtext. So
great. So this is a good little teaser.
I'll give you the 30-second.
That's exactly. That's all. Yeah, that's all we asked for.
Okay, so subtext. Okay, so I'll give you an example. So if I said to you, 3 + 2 = 5, and your mind will go, okay, yeah, I got that. It's pretty obvious, right? Mm-hmm. But if I said to you, or showed you a piece of paper and I showed on the board, it said 3 + X = 5. Okay, mm-hmm. Your brain would automatically start solving X.
Sure,
because you're challenged by it, right? You go, ooh, there's a challenge. X = 2. I got it. I solved this, right? Mm-hmm. So that's a good example of the difference between obvious dialogue or an obvious thing you see, right? Where it's just obvious and on the nose, we call it, right? Mm-hmm. And subtext, because subtext makes you an active participant in the scene by making your brain work a little bit. So when somebody says, like in the famous scene in When Harry Met Sally, when at the end they connect and she says, I hate you, Harry, I hate you. Mm-hmm. And she kisses him.
Right.
We all know what she really means and feels. Right? We know she loves him. Mm-hmm. So the line, I hate you, is really subtext for
I love you.
What she really feels. Right. So I hate you plus the kiss equals subtext. And that's really more interesting than a character saying, I love you, and kissing him. Because then you go, okay, it's obvious. It's just there. So the obvious, and that's another, by the way, that's another thing that you see a lot of in terms of problematic scripts. And there tends to be very lack of subtext throughout. It's mostly on the nose throughout and obvious. It tends to be a passive experience. So you're kind of mostly bored by it.
Because you're not challenged by it.
You're not challenged by it. Whereas when you subtext, you're like completely engaged because your brain is working. You're like there trying to figure this out. You go, I know what she's really feeling. Mm-hmm. Right? You're actually working a little bit.
You're ahead of the audience a bit.
Yeah, exactly.
As a writer, you're ahead of the audience.
Yeah. Well, you want the audience to be an active participant versus a passive one. So, and there's actually techniques for that. And really the good writers, the ones that get hired all the time, especially in dialogue, you mm-hmm. get the writers who are hired for 2 weeks to rewrite the dialogue. It's usually to take the dialogue that's just flat and obvious and on the nose and give it some life. And the life is usually give it some top subtext.
Got it. All right. So one last big question. This is just a geek question. This is just something I want the answer to.
Sure.
Because I know you're who you are and you've studied so many stories. I'm a huge fan of Breaking Bad.
Okay.
And it is one of those stories that it's obviously not a screenplay, but in the scope of the story and the arc of that character and of the arc of the show, there's never been a television show ever to do what he did. Mm-hmm. What's your thoughts on how Gillian, Vince Gilligan or Gillian?
Vince Gilligan.
Vince Gilligan actually was able to create, like, what are the key moments or points that makes that story so good? Because unlike, like very much like Shawshank Redemption in the film world, Breaking Bad's one of those shows that I can't say universally everyone loves, but it is pretty well respected and pretty well loved.
Well, Breaking Bad is not the only one. I mean, The Sopranos did that too, and The Wire also did that too. I mean, we're talking about and Mad Men. I mean, we're talking about shows that just that was just great storytelling. It's just great storytelling, you know? If you have a show that has great storytelling with great characters and interesting scenes and surprises, and I mean, and I'm a big fan of Breaking Bad too. It was just a big novel. It was just this novel that took 5 seasons and I don't know how many episodes to tell a story. And it was a complete story. It was about a character that was very interesting, right? It wasn't your typical good guy. It was this arc, and it just kept us engaged because we wanted to know how that would turn out. And that's really kind of like the key question of stories. Good stories, I think, always make you think and make you wonder what's going to happen next. You know, if you can have that sense of kind of mystery, or J.J. Abrams calls it the mystery box. You know,
I saw that TED Talk.
Of constantly making the audience want to know what's going to happen next. They're constantly tuned. They're going to keep watching scene after scene after scene. In the case of Breaking Bad, they just watch episode after episode after episode.
Except that one episode with the fly. Except that one episode with the fly.
Right. Well, that was entertaining, you know?
Everybody says, like, what the hell? Did the writers just take the day off? They just let's see what we could do with the fly.
Right. But it still kept you engaged, though, right?
It's to a certain extent.
Yeah. So as long as it makes you wonder, what the hell's going on, what is the meaning of this, or
you were just wondering.
It just keeps you engaged. But that was and it's funny because I get that question all the time, especially in the sense of writers are told all the time to make sure your character is likable. Oh, God. It's the biggest note, and they always mention Breaking Bad because here's a character you really connect with who you don't really agree with. In terms of his moral part of it, he's doing something is illegal.
But the thing that's brilliant about him is at the beginning you did. He was just
at the beginning you did, right?
And that's the brilliance of it. You got hooked into him, and then he turns into Scarface,
right? But the thing is why do we keep
loving?
Because I mean, if it's almost like if you had a friend. Mm-hmm. And then your friend started killing people and enjoying it, you suddenly wouldn't become his friend anymore. You wouldn't want anything to do with him. But if you cared about him,
right?
That's the thing. So the thing is there's the lesson in there about making sure you care about that character and you worry about them.
Yep.
About what's going to happen. Then you could tell a good story. That's really the basis of telling a good story and creating a character you care about. And it doesn't have to be likable, but you have to care.
And I was lucky enough to binge watch most of it up until the last 8 episodes. And it was every day my wife and I would just sit and watch 3 or 4 episodes.
Wow, it was great. I know. Thank God for binge watching. Right?
I know, right?
I think it's a better way to
enjoy story
because it's a lot more immediate and you don't have to wait a week. It's all fresh in your mind.
Thank you, Netflix.
Yeah.
So where can people find more about you and more about your work?
Very simple. All you have to do is Google my name or just put karliglesias.com and it takes you to my website and you just get to see all my work there. When anytime somebody asks me for a business card, I don't have business cards. I always tell them just go to my website. That's my business card right there. Just myname.com.
And you have a bunch of books you've written. You have a DVD course as well that you sell.
Well, I don't really sell it. It's mostly the Writer's Store and Creative Screenwriting magazine. They have the DVDs. I just basically, they ask me to do something. I don't like to say no, so I do something and then they sell it. Okay. Same with the teaching. I teach at Screenwriters University and at UCLA Extension's Writers Program, both online, so people can take courses with me.
Okay.
I also consult, so if anybody wants consultation, there's the details on my website.
Okay.
And then I appear on writers' conferences. Sometimes there's this year I'm going to be actually in a few weeks I'll be at a writers' conference in San Luis Obispo where I'll be delivering a keynote address there. And next year I've been invited to a script conference in Poland and then an animation festival in South Africa. So I'm becoming kind of international now.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So one last question. I asked this question of all my guests, and it's a tough question. Ooh. What are your top 3 films of all time?
Wow.
And everybody says the same thing.
Oh, really? What did they say? I'm curious.
Wow. They just
Oh,
all say,
wow. Yeah. Well, that's a very big question.
And it doesn't have to be in order, just 3 films that in the moment that you can remember.
Well, Blade Runner is right up there.
Yeah.
Silence of the Lambs,
Oh, wow.
Shawshank Redemption, The Godfather. Anything by Pixar, except maybe Cars and Cars 2. Those are I think those are the 2 weakest films. But in terms of story, I just watched Up last night with my kids. So and I've seen it 100 times. So it's kind of it always gets you. They just know how to tell great stories. So anything by Pixar, and there's one movie too. It's a kind of I won't say obscure because it's a classic masterpiece, but a lot of people don't know because it tends to be an old film, and that's Charlie Chaplin's City Lights, a movie called City Lights, where he falls in love with a blind girl, and that's one. It's probably one of the earliest romantic comedies, but very very moving. Especially that's
silent, if I remember right.
It's silent, yeah.
That's a silent film.
But it's known for the very last scene in the movie, which is one of the most powerfully emotional scenes in the world in the history of cinema. And they always show that clip or that moment in every Oscar telecast about the history of films and stuff like that. So very very powerful and pretty entertaining film. So I would say that's right up there with my top favorite movies.
Very good list. A good list.
Thank you. Thank you.
Carl, thank you so much for being on the show. We really appreciate you. Gave us a lot of great gems out here. So hopefully
glad to do it. It was my pleasure.
As promised, Carl brought the thunder and brought some amazing knowledge bombs. So Carl, thank you so much again for being on the show and dropping some major knowledge on this episode. Now, if you want links to any of Carl's books, courses, anything about we talked about in this episode, just head over to indiefilmhustle.com/BPS007. That's Bulletproof Screenplay BPS 007. And guys, if you're enjoying the show, please don't forget to subscribe on iTunes and leave us a good review and give us a 5-star review if you really like it. It really helps us out a lot and gets the word out to help other screenwriters on their journeys. So just head over to screenwritingpodcast.com. And that is the end of another episode of the Bulletproof Screenplay podcast. Thank you so much for listening. And as always, keep on writing no matter what. Talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Bulletproof Screenplay podcast at bulletproofscreenplay.com. That's BULLETPROOFSCREENPLAY.com.